Hey, welcome to the Bible Story Podcast. My name is John Drabert. I work at Covenant Bay Bible Camp. So glad to have you here. Hey, if you are a student grades 9 through 12, we have an upcoming retreat November 10th to 12th called The Challenge. You can get all of the details at covenantbay.ca. I hope to see you there. Okay, a little bit of background on our story. We're going to be looking at Jacob. Now, he is the son of Isaac, and Isaac is the son of Abraham. And we've looked at both of those characters previously in the Bible Story Podcast. Now, Jacob fled his home because his brother wanted retribution, or he wanted to revenge on his brother Jacob for some of the things that he had done to him. And Esau, his brother, was quite angry. Now, Jacob went to live with some distant relatives far away so he would be safe there. And he married two women. And if you need to get a bit of background information, I'm going to let you read the backstory in Genesis chapter 29 as to why on earth Jacob would have two wives. I mean, he didn't intend that, at least not initially, but that's what ended up happening. And so you can read the backstory on that, Genesis chapter 29. Now, he worked for his father-in-law, Laban, for 20 years as a shepherd up to this point. So Jacob is now well into his adult life and has many children already. And so this is where we pick up the story. In today's episode, we have a lesson about trust. Now, mistrust erodes relationships and will lead to division. But trust, well, it builds relationships and brings unity to people. So mistrust divides, trust brings unity. And that's a key understanding for today's story. Now, up to this point, Jacob has been serving really faithfully his father-in-law Laban. But he's been noticing a bit of a change in Laban's demeanor or his attitude towards Jacob. Now, Genesis chapter 31 is the book that we're going to be, or the chapter we're going to be looking at today. And let me read verses 3 to 7 to kind of give you a picture of what's going on. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you." So Jacob called Rachel and Leah, that's his two wives, out to the field where he was watching his flock. He said to them, "I have noticed that your father's attitude toward me has changed, but the God of my father has been with me. You know how hard I have worked for your father, but he has cheated me, changing my wages 10 times. But God has not allowed him to do me any harm." So Leah and Rachel both agree that it is probably a good thing for them to leave Laban and their father's house and go and make a life of their own where Jacob was from and his relatives there. And so they all agree to this. But if you read the entire chapter of Genesis 31, you're going to notice that Jacob's frustration with Laban has been growing. And there's maybe an attitude change for him as well towards Laban, and not just Laban with Jacob. So there is this mistrust and this frustration that these two men are experiencing that's been growing, and it's really important for us to note that. Okay, so Jacob takes his family, all of his animals, all his belongings, and they pack up and they leave while Laban is far away doing some work with his sheep and animals. And Laban doesn't have a chance to say or do anything about this. So they pack up, they leave, and when Laban returns, he finds that his family, Jacob and his two daughters and all of his grandkids, they're all gone. And he is furious. He is so mad about this. And so he begins to chase after Jacob. And he catches up to Jacob about 7 days later when they get to Gilead. Now, God warns Laban in all of this, do not harm Jacob. Let me read a little bit more scripture that will give us a little bit of insight onto Laban and Jacob's interaction when they meet up again. This is Genesis chapter 31, verses 25 through 32. It's a little bit of a longer section, so bear with me. Laban caught up with Jacob as he was camped in the hill country of Gilead, and he set up his camp not far from Jacob's. "What do you mean by deceiving me like this?" Laban demanded. "How dare you drag my daughters away like prisoners of war? Why did you slip away secretly? Why did you deceive me? And why didn't you say you wanted to leave? I would have given you a farewell feast with singing and music accompanied by tambourines and harps. Why didn't you let me kiss my daughters and grandchildren and tell them goodbye? You have acted very foolishly. I could destroy you, but the God of your father appeared to me last night and warned me, 'Leave Jacob alone.' I can understand your feeling you must go and your intense longing for your father's home, but why have you stolen my gods?" "I rushed away because I was afraid," Jacob answered. "I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. But as for your gods, see if you can find them, and let the person who has taken them die. And if you find anything else that belongs to you, identify it before all these relatives of ours, and I will give it back." But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the household idols. Okay, so Laban went through everyone's tent, each person's tent, and he searched for the gods that were missing, the household idols that he had purchased that somebody had stolen. Now, he didn't find anything, but then when he got to Rachel's tent, he still, oddly enough, didn't find anything. Now, Rachel had hidden those idols, those household idols, in the saddle on top of her camel, and she was sitting on her camel on a saddle. And so they were hiding there. Now, when Laban found nothing, Jacob became so angry, and all his emotion boiled over, and he began to let it all out. He had this long rant against Laban and how Laban had mistreated him and he didn't trust him and all of these things. And it just laid everything out on the table. Laban had his rant, now Jacob's having his rant, and they put it out all on the table. And it was getting pretty heated. Well, Laban suggested that they enter into a treaty. He could maybe sense that there was no reconciliation for these two coming, and so he suggested that they enter into this treaty, this peaceful agreement that they would have toward one another. And so they enter into this treaty, and then after, Laban then blesses his daughters, he blesses his grandchildren, kisses them all goodbye, and then he leaves and he goes back home. And that, my friends, is the story. Now, there's a few things that we can learn. And one of the things that we notice within this story is that both Laban and Jacob both had this sense of mistrust for one another. They've both been hurt by each other, and now they're just unsure of each other's intentions. And they want to be good to each other, but their relationship is strained. Let me just put it that way. So here's what we can learn from that. We need to deal with the issues that we have with other people when they are small and not let them fester and become bigger and bigger and bigger. Deal with them when they're small. And when you do that, you will find that trust comes back into play. Now, there are times when it takes two people to deal with an issue, correct? And sometimes the other person just refuses to deal with that issue. And the best thing that you can do is what Laban and Jacob did, and separate peacefully and agree to not harm each other. And that's the best case scenario when there is such a division. But if you deal with things when they're small, you can avoid that outcome and find unity as you build trust. So we learn that mistrust divides and trust brings unity. Hey, a growth tip is a way for each of us to grow in a relationship with Jesus. Now, today, it may be a little bit obvious, but here's my tip for you. There is always a bit of friction in relationships. Sometimes it's small, and sometimes it's really big. And we need to simply identify that relational friction that we have with others and connect with those people or that individual. And we want to connect with those people and address that friction, that conflict, in a way that is healthy. And so what I'd suggest is that you have a posture of wanting to learn and wanting to grow versus having a selfish posture of wanting to get your own way and one up the other person. Okay? So my growth tip is identify the relational friction in your life and deal with it while it is small. It's time for our discussion questions today. Gather your crew together and have a chat about these 3 questions. Question number 1. Have you ever experienced division in your life? Did the people separate peacefully or with hostility? Hit pause and share. Question number 2. Jacob was dealing with an unfair boss in Laban, his father-in-law. Now, have you ever dealt with an unfair person who was in a position of authority? Perhaps it was a boss, a parent, a teacher. Share your story, including any regrets that you might have in your behavior and anything that you did that showed that you handled things well. Hit pause and share. Question 3. How should have Jacob and Laban dealt with things differently to avoid such a harsh and big conflict? Hit pause and discuss. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me here on the Bible Story Podcast. Thank you for listening. Hey, and if you think of it, maybe share this with a friend. Subscribe if you haven't already done that. Next week, we're going to look at Jacob again and how it's time for him to reconnect with his brother Esau, whom he had cheated decades earlier. So will it be a good or harsh reconnection for those 2 brothers? Until next time, have a great few days.